Can football play a role in changing society? Possibly. One striking example takes us across the ocean and back 4 decades. In the early 1980s, Brazil was living in a brutal military dictatorship. One oppositional movement became visible to a wide audience all over the country, shouting for democracy and fueling the fire for the masses. While Plato described his master, the Greek philosopher Socrates, as someone who was hugely pessimistic about democracy, millennia later, his Brazilian namesake staked his career and life on it. I Want to Die on a Sunday, December 4, 2011. It might have been the most bittersweet day in Corinthians history. On the day the São Paulo squad won its first Brazilian title in 6 years, millions of fans spilled tears of joy and of grief. It was the day Socrates had passed away. The doctor, the most renowned player in club history, icon of the much-praised 1980s Brazilian national team, but most of all an icon of Democracia Corinthiana, the revolutionary movement of the early 1980s, in which the team openly said no to Brazil's military dictatorship. "I want to die on a Sunday," Socrates once mentioned in an interview. On the same day, Corinthians will win the championship. December 4, 2011 was a Sunday. He got his wish. But let's go back to the very start of this story. In 1964, a military dictatorship seized power in Brazil with the aim of restoring financial and economic order, ridding the country of any communist elements, and amending the constitution, allowing them temporary authority to remove democratically elected officials from office. Many opposed the regime, but it was a then 10-year-old named Socrates who would later have a large impact on opposing this dictatorship. During a coup d'état, Socrates witnessed his father destroy many works of his beloved book collection in fear of reprisal from the military dictatorship's censorship. I was 10, and remember my father burning his book on the bookshelves. That started my interest in politics. The football came by accident. I was a child of the dictatorship. I always had my eyes turned to the social injustices in the country, and I had colleagues who had to hide and run away. I just happened to be good at football. During his time as a professional footballer in Brazil, Socrates achieved a bachelor's degree in medicine from the Faculdade de Medicina de Ribeirão Preto, a rare achievement for a footballer in those days. His medical degree and his political awareness soon earned him the nickname Dr. Socrates, or simply the Doctor. In Brazil, football too was being organized in an authoritarian manner, with players not trusted to behave and therefore made to endure concentração, a period of enforced confinement in the team hotel 48 hours before kickoff. During his time with Corinthians, Socrates co-founded the Corinthians democracy movement in order to challenge the club's management. They began to vote on every decision, no matter how trivial, with all votes equal, whether coming from the board of directors or the kit man. The Corinthians democracy movement also began to protest with, at the time, innovative methods, with Corinthians becoming the first club to use advertising slogans on their shirts. The team began printing political slogans on their jerseys such as Democracia, even adding the image of a splash of blood for effect. The vast majority of Brazilians supported the movement, and the Corinthians democracy movement was recognized as largely responsible for helping raise the political awareness of the Brazilian people. Their democratic actions transcended football and inspired a nation by raising political awareness, encouraging Brazilians to directly participate in presidential elections and vote in the first open election since 1964, printing DIA 15 vote on 15th on their shirts. They knew that the more people they convinced to vote, the more they could harm the dictatorship. However, Corinthians didn't urge people to vote for someone in particular, but rather simply to vote in general. On the pitch, the team were performing well with their cause, aided by the fact such established players were spouting the movement's message. With each win and goal gaining media coverage, democracy was also being celebrated. Seeing Socrates and the Corinthian players stand up, refusing the dictatorship, helped pave the way for the restoration of democracy. Corinthians' democratic movement revolutionized the club's style and was accompanied by success. The team won the championship in 1982 and 1983, a tournament it had not won for 30 years. It was after securing victory against powerful rivals, Sao Paulo, in the 1983 final that the players took a huge banner onto the pitch that read, "Win or lose, but always with democracy," a reference to the diminishing strength of the military dictatorship. The following year, in April 1984, Socrates even spoke at a Direct Elections Now political rally in front of 2 million people. There and then, he hinged his impending transfer on the outcome of a constitutional amendment, stating that if direct presidential elections weren't accepted by the regime, he would go and play in Italy. This selfless act cemented Socrates' political legacy in Brazil. When the vote didn't get through, however, he left to Florence to play for Fiorentina. When he came back after one season, Democracia Corinthiana had come to an end, just like the dictatorship. The Democracia Corinthiana movement did not make the dictatorship fall in 1985, or lead Brazil toward its first presidential elections in 1989. But the movement, spearheaded by Socrates, did inspire millions of Brazilians to become aware of democratic rights and values, and helped hasten the dictatorship's demise. To this day, it is one of the most impactful player power movements football has ever seen. Corinthians' democracy concerned football, but not only football. It embodied the dream of every Brazilian, of removing the dictatorship and seeing the return to universal suffrage. "That was the greatest team I ever played in because it was more than sport," said Socrates. "My political victories are more important than my victories as a professional player. A match finishes in 90 minutes, but life goes on." Socrates died in 2011, but his legacy that he left behind will live on forever.